Son-in-law left a voicemail on a Tuesday afternoon. 6 words. The old man needs to leave. I listened to it twice, standing in the kitchen of the house I built with my own hands in 1987, and then I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt, it did, but because I'd been waiting for that moment for 3 years, and now that it had finally arrived, I knew exactly what came next. Before I tell you what that was, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you're watching from right now. My name is Douglas Hale. I'm 66 years old and I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the city of Columbus, Ohio. I designed drainage systems, overpasses, load-bearing structures, things that had to hold weight, things that had to last. When I retired at 60, I had a paid-off house on Birchwood Court, a pension that covered my needs, 4 rental duplexes generating about $6,800 a month combined, and a woodworking shop in the garage that kept my hands busy. I thought I'd built something solid. Turns out I'd built a target. My daughter was never the problem. Yvonne is sharp, kind, the kind of person who remembers what you said 3 years ago and holds it close. She was 34 when she married Brandon, and I'll admit I had reservations from the first handshake. Not because of anything obvious, just the way he looked at the house when they came for dinner that first Christmas. Slow, measuring. The way an appraiser looks at a property, not the way a guest looks at someone's home. They'd been married 8 months when Yvonne called. Brandon had been laid off from his project management job. They were behind 2 months on their apartment in Westerville. Could they stay with me just for a little while, just until Brandon lands something? Yvonne sounded embarrassed, asking. That was the only reason I said yes. That was 3 years ago. Brandon never really landed anything. He did some freelance consulting, maybe $22,000 in a good year. Yvonne made $58,000 as an occupational therapist. Combined, they pulled in around $80,000 before taxes, which sounds fine until you account for their lease on a $38,000 Chevy Tahoe, Brandon's golf membership at a club in Dublin that cost $4,200 annually, Yvonne's student loans, and the slow, steady drain of 2 adults living in someone else's house while spending like they had a 6-figure income plus a safety net. Which, of course, they did. Me. I didn't charge them rent. Yvonne was my daughter. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Brandon was trying. I told myself a lot of things in those first 12 months that I stopped believing somewhere in the second year. Brandon changed once they were settled. Or maybe I just finally saw who he was. The comments started small. Little observations delivered in a friendly tone, the kind designed to land and walk away before you could respond. You know, Doug, this neighborhood's changing. Property values around here have been flat for years. Said over dinner unprompted while eating food I'd bought. Or, had you thought about whether a house this size makes sense for one person? A lot of guys your age are downsizing. He was 37 years old telling me what made sense for my age. Yvonne would give him a look. He'd shrug like he was just making conversation. But it wasn't conversation, it was a project. By year 2, the comments had shifted into something more organized. Brandon started talking about the future of the property. He used that phrase a lot, the future of the property, as if Birchwood Court was already partially his in some ledger he kept in his head. He mentioned once, casually, that since they'd been maintaining the place, they had a kind of equity interest. I set my coffee down and looked at him. You mow the lawn twice a month, Brandon. That's not equity. He laughed like I'd made a joke and changed the subject. The harder moments were the ones involving Yvonne. Not because she was cruel, but because I could see her slipping. Little by little, she'd stop pushing back when Brandon talked over me at dinner. Stopped defending my choices when he second-guessed them. Stopped calling me just to check in the way she used to. She loved him. I understood that. But love was making her blind to what she was watching happen. Then I met a woman named Sheila at a retirement workshop at the Columbus Metropolitan Library. Sheila was 62, a former high school principal with a dry sense of humor and strong opinions about chess, architecture, and bad coffee. We started having lunch, then dinners, then long Saturday afternoons walking the Scioto Audubon trails. For the first time in years, I felt like myself. Not a resource, not a burden, just Douglas. I mentioned Sheila one evening. Brandon's head came up from his phone like a dog hearing something. You're seeing someone? He said it the way you'd say, "You're skydiving?" Yvonne looked surprised, but smiled. "Dad, that's great." Brandon didn't look like it was great. He looked like he was running calculations. 2 weeks later, I told them I'd like to have Sheila over for Sunday dinner. Nothing formal, just the four of us getting acquainted. Brandon's reaction was immediate. He set down his fork. "I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that." I waited. "We don't know this woman, Doug. This is our home. I think we deserve to have a say in who comes into it." Our home. I heard Yvonne start to say something, then stop. I looked at her. She looked at the table. That was when I understood the full shape of what had happened. It wasn't just Brandon. Yvonne had been in that house long enough, had heard that language often enough, that some part of her had started to believe it too. Our home. Even if she wouldn't have said it herself. I said goodnight and went to my workshop. I do my clearest thinking there, surrounded by sawdust and the smell of linseed oil and the quiet logic of wood grain. You work with wood long enough, you learn that every piece has a direction. Force it the wrong way and it splits. Work with the grain and it holds for 100 years. My phone buzzed at 9:47, a voicemail from Brandon. He called instead of coming to tell me directly, which told me everything about his actual courage. I pleaded twice. "The old man needs to leave. Yvonne and I have talked. This isn't working for us anymore. We need our own space, and frankly, Doug, you're in the way." I set the phone face down on my workbench, looked at the half-finished cabinet I'd been building, ran my thumb along a dovetail joint I'd cut that afternoon, tight and clean, no gap, no slop. Exactly right. I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity, the same feeling I used to get when a structural calculation came out clean, when the numbers confirmed what you already knew. I went inside, opened my laptop, and sent an email to my attorney, Helen Voss. I'd worked with Helen for 11 years on property transactions and estate planning. The email was 4 sentences. She replied in 20 minutes. Her office, Thursday at 10. I slept better than I had in months. Yvonne came to find me the next morning. She was holding her coffee with both hands, and she looked like she hadn't slept. "Dad, I'm sorry about Brandon's message. He shouldn't have said it that way." I told her not to worry about it. She looked relieved, which told me she thought I was going to let it go. I wasn't going to let it go, but there was nothing to gain from telling her that yet. Helen's office was on the 5th floor of a building on South High Street, the kind of office with good light and no unnecessary furniture. She met me with a handshake and closed the door. I told her about the 3 years, the voicemail, the phrase "our home," the way Brandon talked about equity on property that wasn't his. She listened without interrupting. "What's your goal?" she asked when I finished. "I want my house back," I said, "and I want them to understand what it actually means to lose it." Helen pulled up my file on her screen. I'd been thorough over the years, which she knew. Property deed for 23 Birchwood Court, Douglas Allen Hale, sole owner, paid in full since 2011. Utility accounts, Douglas Hale. Property tax records, Douglas Hale. Property tax records, Douglas Hale. Homeowners insurance, Douglas Hale. Brandon's name appeared on exactly nothing. "They'll claim hardship," she said, "especially if Yvonne pushes back. Are you prepared for that?" "She's my daughter," I said. "That doesn't change the deed." Helen nodded. Ohio law on occupant removal when there's no lease is fairly straightforward. We issue a formal 30-day notice to vacate. If they don't comply, we file for eviction with Franklin County Municipal Court. Given there's no written rental agreement and no payment history, the case is simple. She paused. "The harder question is whether you want to do this." I gave them 3 years of simple, I said. "Now I want to do this." She drafted the notice that afternoon. I signed it Thursday evening. A process server delivered it to Brandon at the front door of my house on Friday at noon. I know because Sheila and I were at Katzinger's Deli when my phone started ringing. Brandon, then Yvonne, then Brandon again. 11 calls in 22 minutes. I ate my sandwich and watched the phone vibrate across the table. "You're not answering," Sheila observed. "They're not calling to talk. They're calling to perform." I answered Yvonne's call on the 14th ring. Her voice was shaking. "Dad, what is this? There's a man who served us legal papers at our door." I said, "At my door, Yvonne. The house is mine." She went quiet. You have 30 days to either begin paying market rent, which Helen has set at $1,850 a month for this property and neighborhood, or to vacate. Silence. That's what this is. She hung up. Brandon called back 2 minutes later. I didn't answer. He left another voicemail, this one long and this one angry. He used words like blindsided and betrayal and family obligation. He said they'd fight it. He said I was making a mistake. He said people would hear about this. I saved the voicemail to a folder labeled evidence and went back to my sandwich. That evening, I drove out to check on my rental properties. I make a point of doing it regularly, not because the tenants need supervision, but because I like to stay connected to the work. The duplex on Morse Road was where I ran into Philip and June Bauer, who'd been renting the upper unit for 2.5 years. June was planting bulbs in the small yard. Philip came out when he heard my truck. "Mr. Hale," he said, shaking my hand, "we were actually going to reach out. Our lease is up in 4 months. Any chance we could go month to month for a while? June's mother is moving into assisted living and we might need some flexibility." "Of course," I told him. June looked up from her planting. "We'd also like to do something about the bathroom tile if that's all right. We found a great deal on subway tile and we'd do the labor ourselves. Make it look nicer for when we eventually leave." I told her to send me the materials cost and I'd cover it. She looked genuinely surprised, like she'd expected me to say no. People who pay their rent on time, maintain the property, and communicate honestly should be treated with respect. That's not generosity, that's basic fairness. On the drive home, I thought about that contrast. Strangers in my property treated it better than my own son-in-law treated the house I built with my hands. The Bowers had never once been late. They'd replaced a broken window latch themselves without even telling me. They sent a card at Christmas. Brandon had punched a small hole in the drywall of the hallway last year by accident and never mentioned it. I'd found it while painting. The next 10 days were a study in pressure tactics. Brandon emailed Helen's office claiming they had established tenancy rights through 3 years of continuous occupancy. Helen forwarded it to me with a single sentence: "This won't hold. Ohio law requires cohabitation agreements in writing to establish tenancy." Brandon hired a consultation-only attorney, the kind who charges $300 to tell people things they don't want to hear. That attorney apparently told him the same thing, because the email stopped after day 12. Yvonne called on day 14. She was calmer. "Dad, I need you to know I'm not against you, but we genuinely can't afford first, last, and deposit somewhere else right now. We just don't have that saved." I asked her why not. 3 years of free housing. "Where did that money go, Yvonne?" She didn't answer, but we both knew. Brandon's golf membership. The Tahoe payments. The weekend they spent at a resort in Gatlinburg last fall that Yvonne posted about. The lifestyle that looked like they had money because they were using mine. "I'll give you the 30 days, I said. "That's what the notice says." She cried. I hated that part, but I didn't change my answer. Meanwhile, I'd moved forward on a second piece of the plan. 2 years earlier, when it had first become clear that Brandon wasn't leaving, I'd quietly begun preparing. Not because I knew it would come to this, but because I understand load-bearing structures. When something is holding more weight than it should, you reinforce or you relocate. I'd chosen to reinforce first. For 2 years, I'd reinforced. Now I was relocating. The second piece involved the co-signed auto loan. 18 months into their stay, Brandon had come to me with a problem. His credit was thin. He needed a reliable vehicle for client meetings, which as far as I could tell meant driving to a co-working space in Worthington twice a week. Could I co-sign? The loan was $36,500 on the Tahoe. I'd said yes because Yvonne had asked me directly, and I still believed the situation was temporary. I called my bank and requested removal from the co-signer agreement. The loan officer, a careful woman named Ms. Park, walked me through the process. Without a qualified co-signer, the primary borrower would need to either refinance independently, pay off the remaining balance, or face default. She told me the bank would send written notice to Brandon within 7 to 10 business days. The remaining balance was $28,400. Brandon's combined income without Yvonne's salary wouldn't qualify for independent refinancing. They both knew that. I wasn't sure if he'd understand the connection to me right away, but he would eventually. The 30-day deadline landed on a Thursday. Helen filed the eviction petition with Franklin County Municipal Court the following morning. Court date scheduled 3 weeks out. I found an apartment in Grandview Heights. 1 bedroom, renovated kitchen, a small patio that got afternoon sun, $1,275 a month. I'd been looking quietly for weeks. I signed the lease on a Wednesday and spent that Saturday moving the things that mattered most. My woodworking tools, the framed blueprints from my first major project, a quilt my wife had made before she passed, the 6 house plants I'd kept alive for 12 years. Each box I loaded felt lighter than the one before. Yvonne came out while I was carrying a lamp to my truck. "Dad." She looked pale. "You're actually moving out." "I already live here less than I used to," I said, which was true. I'd been staying at Sheila's 3 or 4 nights a week for the past month, using my own house the way a man uses a storage unit. I'd rather be somewhere I'm wanted. She started to cry again. I put the lamp down and hugged her, held her for a long moment. "I love you," I said. "That doesn't change, but I'm not doing this anymore." She nodded into my shoulder. "You have 3 weeks after the court date. Use them." The courthouse on Mound Street had the particular smell of all government buildings: floor cleaner and paper and recycled air. Helen and I arrived 15 minutes early. Brandon and Yvonne arrived together with a young legal aid attorney who looked like she'd passed the bar recently and was still learning how to carry a briefcase. They sat 20 feet away from us in the hallway. Brandon had dressed carefully, dark jacket, no tie, trying to look like a reasonable man wronged. Yvonne sat next to him with her hands in her lap. She didn't look at me for the first 10 minutes. Then she did just once, and I gave her the smallest nod I could manage. "I'm not your enemy. I'm just done." The judge was a compact man in his mid-50s named the Honorable William Greer. He had the expression of someone who'd heard every version of every story and had stopped being surprised by any of them. Helen presented our case in 12 minutes. Property deed, utility records, tax documents, written notice, certified mail receipt, 0 payment history, 0 written agreement. She was concise, factual, and organized. The legal aid attorney presented their defense in 7 minutes. Hardship, family relationship, 3 years of improvements to the property, emotional dependency. It was a sympathetic argument with no legal foundation, which is the worst kind to make in a courtroom. Judge Greer looked at Brandon over his glasses. "Mr. Calloway," he said, Brandon's last name. I'd given my daughter my last name at birth. She'd taken his at marriage. The judge continued, "Are you claiming co-ownership of this property?" Brandon hesitated. "No, Your Honor. But are you claiming a written rental agreement exists?" "No, but we understood." "Is your name on the deed, the mortgage, any utility account, or any insurance policy associated with this property?" Brandon's jaw tightened. "No." "Then I'm not sure what we're resolving here other than a failure to leave when asked." He turned to Yvonne. "Ma'am, your father gave you 30 days' notice and offered you market-rate rental terms. Is that accurate?" Yvonne's voice was barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." The gavel came down, ruling for the plaintiff, 21 days to vacate. Sheriff enforced writ of possession if non-compliant. Brandon's face went the color of old chalk. Yvonne made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. Their attorney started to ask for an extension and Judge Greer cut her off. "They've had 30 days prior to today. They've had today. 21 days is the ruling." Walking out into the March light, Helen said, "Clean." "Good," I said. Behind us, I heard Brandon's voice, tight and controlled. "This isn't over." I didn't turn around. Yvonne said something I couldn't hear. I kept walking. 4 days later, I received the bank's letter confirming that the auto loan cosigner removal had been processed. Brandon had 10 business days to either refinance independently or face review. His debt-to-income ratio without my backing wouldn't qualify him at any conventional lender. The Tahoe was going to become a problem very quickly. Combined with the legal costs they'd just taken on and the prospect of first, last, and deposit on a new place, the math was going to get ugly fast. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly. More the quiet sense of a structure settling the way it was designed to. Every load going to the right place. The week after the court date, Brandon tried one more approach. He called from a number I didn't recognize, which told me he knew I wouldn't answer his regular number. I picked up out of curiosity. Doug. His voice had changed. The arrogance was gone, or at least filed down into something that tried to sound like humility. I wanted to apologize for the voicemail. I was frustrated. I said things I shouldn't have said. I said thank you for that. I want to talk about whether there's a path here where we don't have to. There isn't, I said. But Brandon, a piece of advice. I paused. The bank is going to send you a letter about the Tahoe. You should open it right away and read it carefully. Silence. What did you do? I withdrew a favor, I said. Good luck. I hung up. Sheila heard the call from the kitchen of her condo. When I walked in, she raised an eyebrow. The Tahoe, I confirmed. She handed me a cup of coffee and we didn't discuss it further. They cleared out on day 19. Helen called to let me know. She'd driven by and the driveway was empty. The key was on the kitchen counter. I drove over that afternoon. The house wasn't destroyed, but it wasn't cared for either. Scuff marks on the hardwood in the hallway from furniture being dragged rather than carried. A crack in the bathroom tile that hadn't been there before. The backyard, which I'd maintained for 28 years, was overgrown and had a rusted grill in the corner that wasn't mine. Small things, individually. Together, they told a story about people who had never thought of the place as belonging to someone else. I walked through every room slowly, took photographs, filed an insurance claim for documented damage. Then I called a contractor I'd used for years on my rentals and scheduled 3 days of repair work. That evening I sat in the empty kitchen for a while. The house was quiet in a way I'd forgotten, the particular silence of a structure that belongs entirely to one person. No tension hovering, no voice from the other room measuring something. Just a house and me, and 31 years of memories that predated all of this. I wasn't sad. I was tired. But it was the good kind of tired, the kind you feel after a long job is finally done. I listed the property 3 weeks later. My realtor, a woman named Sandra I'd worked with twice before, said the market in that zip code had strengthened considerably. We priced it at $394,000. Within 9 days, we had 2 offers. I took the stronger one, $400 cash, from a couple in their early 40s relocating from Pittsburgh. They closed in 5 weeks. I walked away with $400 free and clear. No mortgage, no complications, nothing encumbered. Brandon and Yvonne were, by that point, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Reynoldsburg. I knew because Yvonne sent me a text with the new address, in case you want to send mail. I appreciated that she was still trying. I sent her a short reply. Got it. Thank you. I hope the new place feels like home soon. I meant it. The Tahoe was repossessed 6 weeks after the cosigner removal. I heard about it from Yvonne, who mentioned it the way you mention a minor weather event. Brandon's dealing with some car stuff. I said I hoped it worked out. She didn't elaborate. I didn't ask. I found a property in Worthington, a 2-story Craftsman on a quiet street with a detached garage big enough to build a proper workshop. $300,000. I made an offer the same week. It was accepted. I used a portion of the Birchwood Court proceeds and paid cash. The rest went into a conservatively managed investment account that Helen helped me structure. The workshop took 2 months to set up the way I wanted it. Proper ventilation, good lighting, tool storage built to my own specifications. I spent a Saturday afternoon in November arranging the space with Sheila, who had the useful habit of asking the right questions. Why is the bench height adjustable? Because in 20 years I might need it lower. She thought about that. That's very practical. I'm an engineer, I said. She laughed. In December, Yvonne called on a Sunday afternoon. She sounded different, not the Yvonne of the past 3 years, careful and layered, but something closer to the one I'd known before Brandon. Dad, can I come see the new house? I told her yes. She came the following Saturday. I showed her the workshop first, which was the right call, because it gave us something to talk about before we had to talk about anything else. She asked questions, remembered things I'd told her when she was small about wood grain and joinery, ran her hand along a cabinet I just finished. She sat at the kitchen table after the tour and held her coffee with both hands, the same way she had the morning after the legal notice. I know I should have said something, she told me. When he started talking about our house, I heard it and I didn't correct him. I should have. Yes, I said. Nothing softer than that, because softening it would have made it less true. I'm sorry, Dad. I know, I said. I'm not asking you to take sides against your husband. I'm asking you to remember whose daughter you are. She nodded slowly. I'm working on it. It wasn't a resolution, it was a beginning of one, which is more honest anyway. Brandon called once after that in January. I answered. He had found a new job, a project coordinator position at a construction company in Gahana, making $45,000 a year. He was speaking to a financial counselor about the debt situation. He wasn't asking me for anything, he said. He just wanted me to know. I understand now what you were trying to show me, he said, that generosity isn't the same as obligation. I said, that's correct. He said, I handled everything wrong. I said, yes. There was a long pause. Is there anything I can do to— Not right now, I said. Keep working. Keep paying your bills. If you and Yvonne build something stable, we can talk eventually. Okay, he said quietly. Thank you for answering. I told him I hoped the new job went well. I meant that too. Sheila asked me once, while we were doing the crossword on a Sunday morning, if I ever regretted it. Not the eviction, she knew I didn't regret that, but selling the house I built in 1987 where Yvonne grew up, where my wife and I had planted the maple tree in the front yard that was now 30 years tall. I thought about it for a while before answering. The house was always going to exist without me in it eventually, I said. The question was whether I'd choose to leave or get pushed out. I chose. She looked at me over her reading glasses. Do you miss it? Sometimes, I said, but I miss the version from before. The last 3 years weren't my house anymore anyway. She nodded, went back to the crossword, and asked me the capital of Eritrea without missing a beat. I told her Asmara, and she said she already knew. She just wanted to see if I did. That's the kind of woman she is. In February, Yvonne and I started having dinner every other Sunday, just the two of us, rotating between her apartment and my house. We talk about her work, about projects I'm building, about books. We talk about her mother sometimes, carefully, the way you handle something precious. We don't talk about what happened, not directly. But we both know it sits underneath the table between us like a stone, heavy and permanent. Something we'll eventually have to name properly. I think we will. I'm in no hurry. I am 66 years old. I have a house I chose, a workshop I built, a woman I love who beats me at chess more often than I'll publicly admit, and 7 rental units that run cleanly because I've always treated people who pay fairly with basic dignity. I have my daughter, imperfectly, as daughters and fathers usually are. I have my health, my pension, my tools, and the reasonable certainty that the next chapter belongs entirely to me. Someone told me once that the hardest thing in the world is to let people experience the consequences of their own choices when you have the power to soften them. I spent 3 years softening consequences. I spent 31 years in a house that I let someone else start calling theirs. I spent more patience than I had on someone who mistook that patience for permission. When my son-in-law said the old man needs to leave, he thought he was pushing me out. He was actually setting me free. He just didn't know it yet. And by the time he did, I was already gone, and everything I'd built, the real things, the ones that mattered, had come with me. There's a moment I keep coming back to. I'm standing in my empty kitchen on Birchwood Court, the afternoon light coming through the window the way it always did, and the house is completely quiet. No tension in the air. No voice measuring something from the other room. Just 31 years of a life I'd built, and the knowledge that I was finally walking out of it on my own terms. People sometimes ask if I feel guilty, and I understand the question. Brandon was my son-in-law. Yvonne is my daughter. The house where she grew up, where her mother and I planted that maple in the front yard, is now owned by a couple from Pittsburgh who are probably painting the living room right now. That's a real loss, and I don't pretend otherwise. But here's what I know about cause and effect. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It simply runs the numbers on the choices you've made and delivers a result. Brandon chose to leave a voicemail calling me an old man who needed to leave his own home. That choice had a result. The result wasn't something I did to him. It was something he did to himself, and I simply stopped standing in the way of it. What I had to build first was the moral clarity to act at all. Not anger, not spite, but the honest recognition that allowing someone to treat you with contempt isn't kindness, it's a kind of dishonesty. For 3 years, I told myself I was being patient, being generous, giving Brandon time to find his footing. But what I was really doing was teaching him that the floor would always hold, no matter what he did to it. That lesson was wrong, and I was the one delivering it every single day I let it continue. Doing the right thing, I eventually understood, sometimes looks nothing like what people call being nice. The part that took the most from me wasn't filing the eviction or withdrawing from that cosign or even selling the house. It was making the decision clearly without flinching and then carrying it through every single step without looking for a reason to stop. That kind of resolve doesn't come from anger. Anger burns out. It comes from knowing precisely what you're doing and why, and being willing to live with the discomfort of every hard conversation along the way. Helen's office. The courthouse. Standing in my driveway while Yvonne cried into my shoulder. None of those were easy. I did all of them anyway. And the thinking it required, the careful, methodical planning over months, the legal documents, the property records, the loan withdrawal, time to land at exactly the right moment. That wasn't cold calculation. That was me finally taking my own situation seriously enough to think it through properly. I spent 31 years as an engineer. I know what happens when you ignore a load-bearing problem and hope it resolves itself. It doesn't. It fails, usually at the worst possible time, and takes everything around it down with it. Yvonne sits across my kitchen table now every other Sunday. We talk about her work, about whatever I'm building in the shop, about small things and occasionally larger ones. It's not repaired, not fully, but it's honest in a way it wasn't before. That honesty cost something to build. I think it was worth the price. I think most honest things are. I am 66 years old, living in a house I chose with a woman who challenges me in a workshop that runs exactly the way I designed it. The son-in-law who told me to leave thought he was ending something. He was right, just not about what.